Okay, so we got small blind versus big blinds. Let me just share my screen here.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear?
Good day.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Good day.
Great. Okay, so this is the check down lines. And the small one is the big one, 2-bit pots. Going to stream this to YouTube simultaneously. So if anyone's watching this on YouTube, they can just pop a question. If you don't want to chat, don't want to talk, you can just pop a question in the YouTube or in the tutorial chat on Discord. So we'll just get through it. This is just, I think it's mostly force-man low. Yeah, these were taken out of the force-man low sims. Some of these spots are quite interesting. These check-down lines are important to know. Blind versus blind. If you don't play these correctly, then the EV, a lot of your hands will be a bit off. Pretty easy to play a strong hand, but how do you play, you know, these weaker and marginal hands? How do you get to showdown? That sort of thing. Important stuff to know. So here opens to 3 big blinds. So I think for all these we're in the small blind. If I remember correctly, all these are for the small blind. We're in the small blind. We're using our polar opening strategy. We've got some limps as the small blind open as well. And then there's also a few other sizes that we would use besides this 3 big blind open. With the 3 big blind open, we'll take this. And then the villain who's in the big blind calls. And we get this Jack 5-2 two-tone top, two-tone flop. We check, villain bets, and we call. Checks through on the King of Hearts turn, and now we're on the river, and the river comes the 8 of clubs. So let's have a look at each of these hands and try to group them into the correct category. Got bet or check, got bet quarter pot for 3 big blinds, we've got bet twice the pot for 24 big blinds, and we've also got not within range. So what do you guys think?
Well, I'll take a guess here. Starting with the not within range. I think on the king turn, which is very good for our polarized range, we're going to have you know, a nice, probably a polarized sizing, and you know, with a lot of you know, our strong hands. And I think 10-8 with its robust equity is going to be somewhere in that bluffing area of that big bet size on the turn.
So we just check called. We just check called the bet.
Yeah.
So
when the king comes on the turn, we can donk. I'm pretty sure, and I think the 10-8 it fits nice within that range in the strong bluff.
What makes you think
area.
you can donk the turn?
Because I think the king, like any ace, any king, any queen, even if the jack pairs, possibly, but at least though any of the big Broadway cards, I think we have a range that has a betting range on the turn as a lead. And because our relative, we still have, just like we called, but we're gonna call, we still have more relative polarity, I think, that we can have a leading range there. Maybe I'm grasping at things.
Okay, so you got some polarity here with your preflop open, and then checking short of it, checking a lot of your weaker hands. You got some traps there, and a lot of those traps raise this bet. So when you just call, that polarity goes away. So then when the king comes, it's not particularly so amazing for your flop calling range that you want to
It
dump.
improves in position, if anything.
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about what kinds of hands that villain might turn into a bluff on the flop, a lot of those might be some king highs, queen highs, ace highs kind of hands. Sure, we'd be calling with like 2 overs, like got like king queen. We'd call this bet, but king queen and ace king aren't like an enormous part of the range because the ranges are so wide.
Okay, so we could raise the flop then. That could for those reasons of having robust equity, maybe that hand would raise the flop. I mean,
You want 10-8 to raise the flop.
Yeah. I just don't. I think 10-8's going to just be more aggressive than the others and do something before it gets to the river.
You don't want any
node.
of these other hands to raise the flop?
This raises the flop. It's bottom set. You can't go check call on the flop with bottom set, especially this one, because I honestly I doubt we like check it out that much. Like I could see it a little bit, but on 2-turn board, but especially because it's not just bottom set, it's bottom set of deuces, and that blocks significantly less checkbacks than, let's say, the average bottom pair, I think. So like there's every single incentive you could imagine to fast play it on the flop, whether that be c-bet or check raise.
Okay, great. Is 10-8 so good to raise, you know, compared to your other flush draws? Why is 10-8 so good that you want to raise it all the time? Like, this particular hand is not super different than any other flush draw that you've got, is it? It's sure, it's got flush draw, backdoor straight draw, some pair potential. I mean, you've got like 4-3 between the 5 and the 2. That's a straight draw with a flush draw. You got pairs of 5 with the flush draw. Some of those hands might raise at a very, very high frequency, or have bet the flop with a very high frequency. That's another thing you guys didn't necessarily touch on. Potentially hands that would bet all the time. But it's not like 10-8 is so special on the flop that it makes for an always raise compared to like the other flush draws that you've got. So when you're thinking about how you're playing your flush draws against this bet, unless there's an outstanding reason, there's usually going to be indifferent between raising and calling, because you want flush draws in both your calling range and your raising range. Does that make sense? And then the set of twos for all those reasons. Third nuts. Reasonably easy to outdraw in terms of your opponent's pocket pairs, which might have bet this and turned a set. So a little bit of equity denial there. It also blocks hands that would continuation bet on the turn. So if your opponent is bluffing with a 2 on the flop, they're reasonably likely to use that 2 pair and trip equity draw to bluff the turn as well. So this particular hand, if you just call here, you end up blocking bets on the turn, right? Compared to, say, pocket 5s or pocket jacks, which end up blocking checks on the turn, right? So 2s is the not within range because it always raises here. Okay, so given that, what's happening with the other hands?
The turn king is not is what I would say, because the action there was a flop bet, and then when we turn the king, it's very high in our range because we don't float that many king highs, and I mean so they're like no one has, everyone's got some amount of king x for sure, but especially after imposition checks back the turn, a king is very strong for both players. And none of these hands would ever want to bluff or like, to me the king, the top pair is the one that wants to bet twice the pot, like clearly. I mean, if it was a flop top pair, I think it might go for a smaller size or something if the run out, if we were talking about very different run out in hand. But here I think it's pretty easy to go for 2x.
Yep. So here, with the king coming on the turn, there's no great reason for the villain to be checking back too much king x, unless you're going to be doing this at a very high frequency on the river, right, with your kings. So in order to try and make your opponent indifferent between betting and checking their kings, you're going to have to realize that you're going to have to do some overbet probing when they check back here on the turn. And a relative brick comes. The 8 is a relative brick, doesn't really complete any hands in particular. So king 7 works well there. Didn't quite touch on king 2.
Well, king 2, with those two pairs, like you want to think about the ones that block checkbacks, and I think there's a good amount of 2x that would bluff that turn on this turn, because there's not too many draws to pick from or many overcards. But there's still going to be a decent amount of deuce 2x that check back and are trying to show down. So we block with king 2. We sure, we have a king and all the above, everything that was said above applies, but like we have a 2 blocking, and a 2 is essentially just trying to show down here, I think, like against give ups.
Yeah, so what does that mean for king 2? So if your opponent's got a 2, and
it will be indifferent between betting or checking because it has reasons to bet or to check
on the turn
because of the king and the 2. Sorry, what?
Okay, so we'll just try and explain it. So here, king 2, it's got the 2 blocker. Sure, it's 2 pair, but you know, it's only it's got the relevant blockers. So this 2 blocker prevents your opponent from having a 2. And if they've got a 2, you know, say for example they've got 4-2 or queen 2, something like that, and they've checked back here, they're trying to get the showdown. So they're going to be checking back the river. And because we block those particular hands, that means that our opponent is less likely to check behind. And so if they're less likely to check behind, they're going to be betting at a high frequency, or they're basically more likely to have a hand that wants to bet. Because they have a hand that's more likely that wants to bet, going for a check raise is an enticing option. But obviously we can also bet enormous with this hand. We're betting twice a pot with king 7, so this hand is actually indifferent between checking and betting three times a pot. Okay, and that leaves 10-8 for this block value bet here. Betting small, trying to get called by weaker pairs, trying to get called by ace high. So let's have a look at the sim. So there's the 10-8. There's the king 2. As you can see, it's indifferent between checking and betting twice a pot and 3 times a pot. A lot of these king x's are either betting twice a pot, 3 times a pot. And when they do bet twice a pot, the opponent snaps off with a king, bets 3 times a pot, still snapping off with a king. As you can see, there's only about 5%, 5% top pair in the range. A lot of this king x is bet the turn for the big blind here.
What does king does versus a bet on the turn? Does it raise or just call?
There's a bit of both. It's for the same reasons. These twos, it's not a huge amount of them. But some of these weaker pairs here, we'll be betting.
2x that bets the turn will be indifferent to checking back on the river, right? Because of the missed draws. Like some of them.
Sorry,
like you'll see some 2x. You're in position, you bluff the turn with 2x. And you're on the river brick, right? You'll be I'm seeing it now, but like some of them, plenty of them check back the river, the 2x. Not all of them, but they're I expect it to be more mixed, but it's instead some ranks pure bet, it seems. No, it's only the 2 pair. Yeah, okay. So the 2x that stab the turn give up on the river because they still beat missed draws at showdown. So when you have king 2 on the turn and you're facing a bet, yeah, sure, you can check raise, but you block the river checkbacks. So you'll be barreled into more often on the river when you check call the turn, which is great for king 2. And on top of that, it's top and bottom pair, which can be like the board can pair and counterfeit it. So less incentive to pile in money in general with those kinds of 2 pair. So lots of reason for check calling the turn.
Yep. So I mean here, for example, take one of these lines here, faces pot size bet, river brick, your opponent's just ripping it in with their sets, and king 2 blocking essentially half the sets, blocking stuff like jack 2 and king 2, snaps off on the river. Okay, what was the line that we're looking at? Yeah, 10-8. Always betting small, because you notice if we check, if the opponent has a jack or a king, they're betting anyway for half pot or 3/4 pot. So you might as well bet yourself to get value from those weaker pairs and some of the ace-highs in the opponent's range, and then kind of prevents your opponent from being able to raise some of this jack X. So you end up losing a little bit less against the jack, because you know, so if you check and then you face half pot bet. If you had kind of one of this 10-8, you can look at 10-8 offsuit there, that's calling anyway, right? So you're thinking about how your hand does against some of your opponent's hands. You bet small here, sure you run into a jack sometimes, but if you checked and they bet half pot, you would have called a half pot bet. So against a jack in particular, when you've got 10-8, you only lose 3 instead of 6 big blinds. Thinking about the other hands in the opponent's range, and you can still see the EV difference there. It seems quite small, but it is fairly important to realize that there is these EV differences with these kinds of hands. If you bet, the opponent will call some of his weaker pairs, right? So you win 3 big blinds against those hands, compared to if you check, all those weaker pairs will check back. You actually win a slightly bigger bet sometimes against some of the 8x in the opponent's range, some of the weaker 8x in the opponent's range, and you kind of block some of that value here against this half pot bet. So that's why the 10-8 is still a profitable call on the river against a half pot bet. Getting the 3/4 pot bet, not really as profitable as a call there. Going for the check jam with a 10-8 offsuit. Yeah, king 7, as we discussed earlier, not a lot of top pair in the opponent's range. Opponent's range is on this 8 pretty much capped to that rivered set of 8s. They're not checking back any of their trips or 2 pairs, and a lot of their strongest top pairs are betting as well. So when they get to the river here, their range is very capped, and that's fine because we don't have enough we don't have enough streets left essentially to be able to rent the opponent to be able to try to exploit the opponent's gap range, and the river card, if they're building their check back range sufficiently well, will be able to cover for that. So here, for example, like ripping it in. Oh, they don't even have the set. They've got King 8 though. King 8, Jack 8. Okay, that's confusing. So I've got a little bit of the set. A little bit of the two pairs. Which river those two pairs there? Okay.
Why doesn't Ace King out of position check more often, blocking Ace High?
Yeah, it does.
Oh,
It's
okay.
for same sort of reason as King 2. Check, they check back on
Yeah,
the side. The main reason it isn't quite they're like a huge amount is because there's not quite a lot of ace high. A fair amount of this ace high continues to bet the turn, because when a king comes, you know, you still want to have some overcard bluffs, right? So when a king comes, the only overcard bluff that you can use is an ace. So there's not quite as many aces in the check back ranges as you would like most of the time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, let's start with this next one. So this next one is 9-3-2. We check again, and villain bets 3/4 pot this time. We call, checks through on the turn, and now we've got the ace river. So 9-3-2, 6 of clubs, bringing backdoor flush draw in, and then river to ace. Okay, so anyone have any thoughts about which of these hands are not within range?
It's not King Deuce, that's for sure. Because King Deuce can check all the flop for sure, but the other three are floats like that. They're somewhat marginal hands, so you gotta figure out which one has the least EV floating. You got 2 overcards with backdoor straight draw. You got 1 over with backdoor flush draw. And 1 over, 1 backdoor flush draw, and backdoor straight draw all over the place. To me, it looks like King 8 is the weakest one. Because it has, like, when I look at Sims and I figure out why are we floating this like marginal float over this one, it's usually you can kind of add up reasons to float, such as backdoors and whatnot, and like the ones that float more often or have more EV or whatever, they tend to, like, those tend to add up more, and the King 8 seems to have the least of them.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a fair assessment. Why do you favor 10-7 over King 8?
So it's whether the 10 and the king are both in overcard. But that's actually an interesting question, because like the king is obviously stronger and has showdown value. So actually, I don't know how to gauge how much stronger the king is than the 10 as an overcard, but I do know that the backdoor straight draw and backdoor flush draw, like the 10-7 has so many runouts, so many different turns on which it hits a straight draw, that it cannot, like, I think it might be the best float out of all three, honestly. But I honestly don't know how exactly to judge the king versus the 10.
Yeah, okay. I mean, this one's got a lot of backdoor straight draws. What about the queen jack? How many backdoor straight draws does that one have? So let's just count how many backdoor straight draws the 10-7 has. Right. It has the 8, so I guess you can count the 8 twice, because that brings an open ender. Right. The EV of the 8 will be sort of twice as high as the EV of any of the other backdoor straight draws.
Right.
So it's got the 8, the 6, and the jack. I'm missing one.
Don't think so.
yeah, the 8, the 6, and the jack. So it's kind of got 3 different ranks, but the 8, you can kind of count that twice, so it's kind of got like the effective of 4 different ranks. Queen jack,
The 10, which counts for 2, the
and they
king,
count for 2, the king,
and the 8, so
and the
equal. Like
yeah,
those
so
bits.
equal, right?
Queen Jack has 2 overs, while
Yep.
10-7 has 1 over and the backdoor flush draw. So
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to gauge that again, but it's like evens out in my mind.
Which one do you intuitively feel is better, backdoor flush draw or the second overcard?
Just from looking at BBB sims, like it really feels like overcards are the nuts out of position.
Yeah,
Like
I
it
mean,
really
overcards
likes
are a lot
overcards.
easier to defend, and you get because overcards to the board, when they kind of materialize on the turn, they become very strong hands. Your opponent will be bluffing with a lot of kind of 1 over 1 under type of hands.
Mhm.
And so when one of these 2 overcards hit, it becomes a very strong top pair, which can call down a lot of barrels profitably, or if it checks her on the turn, will, as we saw on the last board, overbet the river. Right? Overbet the river for value. So it becomes quite strong. But in order for the flush draw to get there, you have to call the flop bet, have that turn one of the diamonds, and then have the river turn a diamond. That happens actually much less frequently. And you've also got the potential of needing to actually call that turn bet. This doesn't quite happen anywhere near as much. This is you just have 3 clean outs. 3 clean outs. How often does that happen? 3 out of 45, 44. About 7-8% of the time. How often does a backdoor flush draw come in? About 4 or 5% of the time. So the overcard being a relatively clean out for the Queen Jack happening more frequently than the backdoor flush draw. And the hand is, relatively the same kind of strength in sort of those barreling lines. Okay. And then, yeah, King 8 doesn't have any straight draw, it just has a backdoor flush draw and just has 1 overcard. The 8 and the 7 are kind of very similar in terms of the strength of their undercard. So King 8 is the worst out of the bunch. And so we follow that there.
Do you have any extra thoughts on how to, like, if the backdoor straight draw was not a factor, how to compare the 10 to the king? Like, obviously king is better, but like, how much is what I'm asking? Like, how do we figure out how much? All other things being equal.
It's not an enormous amount better if you have other types of hands that will want to cover that rank.
Right. Okay.
Right, because the EV of hitting that top pair comes from the fact that you don't have that many of that rank compared to the opponent. Right. Sure, there's the particular run out where 10 comes and then a king comes. But this particular hand isn't really going to reach that run out too often. And this particular hand isn't going to reach the run out where a king comes and then a 10 comes. So, like, you understand what I mean? If it comes 10 and then king, this hand isn't going to get there very often, right? It has to check through on the turn in order for that particular hand to get there.
It did.
Right. So, but if it goes 10 and then king, well, I mean, this hand is going to get there, right? Because it's going to call the turn bet. It's going to be a pretty strong hand, pretty strong bluff catcher. Chopping with the value range. And then short sucks for this hand. Right, and it's great for this hand, but this hand doesn't get there. So the idea of this hand in that 10 king run out is never realized.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And you've got other hands like king queen, kind of similar to queen jack, 2 overcards with a bunch of straight draws. You've even got ace king yourself, so. And as well as all the suited ones, it's all suited versions with backdoor flush draw. So you can pretty easily call this bet with those hands. So king 8 not within range. 6 of clubs, and then the 10 checks through. And we get the ace of diamonds river. So what are we thinking?
This is a really good run out for us. Like we get to bluff everything, I think.
Why do you feel this is a
Yeah,
good
I
run
don't
out for us?
The ace, I think we have a high amount of a much higher amount of ace X.
Yeah, good. So we've got a lot of
And
ace X, yeah.
that's I would say that's the main thing, honestly. But it considering that they check back turn, like it's they mostly didn't improve. Like all of their overcards, like they have more king X, queen X, etc. than we do, but we have more ace X, I would say, and those did not improve. So we just have like a lot less air than they do. So I imagine that we would never bet or check a bluff. That's the main thing.
Yeah,
Just
good.
thinking
I mean,
about
we just got
looking
loads
at
of ace X, right? Loads of ace X
Yeah.
call this bet. Some offsuit aces with 2 overcards, they're calling this bet. Any suited ace with a backdoor flush draw, any ace with a wheel draw, all of those will be calling. All of those will be checking and then calling at high frequency, right? On this kind of board, it's not really necessary to be bluffing too much ace X in terms of a flop betting range. So a lot of them will make it into this line.
And so with that in mind, like by elimination, it makes me think that king deuce is the better check. But like when if I wasn't shown better check, I would think that it makes a fantastic check because with the king you block give ups, and you're only betting to get called by a worse 2 pretty much, because they don't have to call king high, of course. And so like maybe there's like a sliver of betting frequency because the hand doesn't really know what it likes to do. Maybe
okay. Well, I mean,
it goes up
think about the relative strength of hands now once this ace comes. Is this really going to be betting for value?
Oh, you think it's okay, fair. All right, I can see a lot more as a bluff just because we have a lot less air. So like we need to find bluffs, and the new ace makes that the showdown value of a deuce is pretty much is very much down the drain. So yeah, okay. Now you call me out. It's a bluff for
so
sure.
yeah, so I mean it does have a little bit of showdown value, beats the other 2x, but kind of
I imagine
blocks
there's
some
a
hands
number
that you
of
want to
give
get
ups
to
for
showdown.
EP.
Sorry. Yeah, so
I imagine there's a number of give ups.
in the opponent's check back range here. They're just they're going to be giving up a lot here on the river, so you can leave your checking range pretty weak just because they don't have anything very often. Sure, you want to have some traps and stuff.
I just meant it as like the king deuce will show down and be good some of the time for sure. Thanks to the give ups. But yeah, so incentive to do both, so better check for sure.
Okay. So if you're thinking about turning this hand into a bluff, what's its EV going to be when you face a bet, when you check and face a bet?
0. The CV comes from showing down. So if we think our opponent, for example, overbluffs this spot because he doesn't understand that he's supposed to give up, we'd be pure bluffing this as an exploit, for example. And if our opponent gives up at equilibrium, then
I mean, if the opponent was betting a lot on the river, you might be able to find a call, just because.
Oh, you would have EV check calling. Yeah,
you can have EV check calling. Usually in lines where your opponent is playing way out of equilibrium, you want to take that line more often. Anyway, we'll run that node lock after we figure this out. So bet or check, and what about these other 2 hands?
Is the 10-7 the big bet because it just unblocks the continuing range so well. Better than the Queen Jack.
Sorry, blocks what range?
The continue, like it's a better bluff to bet large. The 10-7, it
So yeah, which hands to block?
block.
So
It's blocked.
if you're thinking about
I'm
betting
blocking
big,
the jukes.
if you think about betting big,
Yeah.
you want to block calls. So which calls do you block? In contrast, if you wanna bet small, you want to unblock folds. All right.
Yeah.
So which calls do you block when you bet big?
Well, we're blocking like 10-9 and
Yeah, just list them off: 10-9,
yeah.
9-7, 7-6. Great.
Yeah.
10-6. And then the Queen Jack. What's it doing?
I think it's kind of just it's getting folds from like maybe some kings that aren't gonna call, like some king high, maybe some.
Yeah, well, if we're bluffing King 2 sometimes, they're not going to be calling anything weaker than a 2. Right? Because anything weaker than anything, well, even a 2, because it blocks bluffs, it becomes a minus EV call. Right?
Yes.
So they're not even continuing with the 2. So Queen Jack for that reason, gets folds from a 2.
That makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So you can bet very small and get 2 to fold, which is nice.
It also blocks a lot of like Queen 9 and Jack 9 and.
Yeah, that's fair as well. I mean, you've got loads of different hands you can bet in the big size. So it's just important to not overdo that when you have a lot of combos of bluff candidates for those particular ranks. So 10-7 in particular always goes big because you don't really have too much 7x. So the opponent, when they're facing this big bet, can't adjust their calling range, their bluff catching range, to avoid hands that block bluffs. So here, for example, King 9, never calling, 9-7, basically always calling the 9-7 of clubs, 9-5, always continuing, right? Because it's difficult for hero to have a hand in with a 7 or a 5 that has called this bet and then can be used as a bluff here. Right, so if you have if the villain has 9-7 here, that 7 blocker doesn't block as many bluffs, potential bluff candidates. So for us, when we've got stuff like King Queen, King Jack, King 10, like loads of different options to use for the different sizes, we don't want to overdo it with those particular hands in the big size, because you'll end up saturating those ranks very quickly. What else was that? The node lock. Yeah, okay. I mean, sure. We can node lock them to just like bluff anything weaker than a 10 maybe. Just stab anything weaker than a king. People will do that. So, they're a bit weird with this kind of stuff. So just check everything, and then against that bet we just continue with everything. So doing these sort of node locks, when you're studying the sims, doing some node locks with kind of, especially on the river, because the river is going to be fairly easy for you to implement. And it's fairly easy to kind of get an idea of what the opponent is doing. If you see a spot like this and you say, okay, well, the solver is like checking everything to give up, but my opponents, if they got queen high, they want to stab. Right? If they got jack high, they want to stab. So what happens if they just stab everything, right? Or stab a large amount? How do I play now? Well, it goes from almost betting everything to basically checking everything, and then against that stab, never folding, right? Queen Jack higher here is calling, and then these other hands are being used as a bluff. Check raise, right? It's essentially in this particular. Sorry.
And it's raising small too, obvious reasons, but like
yeah. So that particular raise there. Can change things up maybe if they want to check some of the queen highs. Yeah, right, that'll do. Run it again. Almost the same kind of deal. Very high check raise frequency, never folding against this bet. So when you're doing these kinds of quizzes and you're looking through the sim, or you're just looking through the sim in your own time, and you see a spot which you think either you or the opponent is playing badly, you should no lock those decisions and then see what the response would be. That helps you with your the way that you would exploit the opponent, right? So their silence, your initial reaction was to bet everything, but the opposite is true. It's to check
it
everything.
wasn't to bet everything, but yeah. Like
it's to check
right.
everything and let the opponent make the mistake.
Yeah.
So usually if your opponent is going to make a mistake, you want to let them do that. Okay, let's go to the next one. 8-4-2. Same kind of line, bet half pot. And now we get the run out 8-4, so there's 2 pair on the board. So what are we thinking with this? It's a bit of an interesting run out. One of the rarer ones, but it's good to know what to do in these kinds of spots.
Both queens and 10-9 would be the candidate for not being in range, right? Because they both have big incentive to fast play, I imagine. And 9 is just a great bluff. Both as a c-bet and as a check raise. And queens.
I would think though that queens prefers raising over 10-9.
You got 9s, 10s, jacks, and then queens and up. So like, I usually when you got a bunch of overpairs, it's the higher ones will like mix in checks more than maybe population would, I guess is the way to say it. But like yeah, like it's queens is a lot more comfortable. I'm not saying it's doing it often, but it would be a lot more comfortable check calling than 9s or 10s, right? But and I guess you can also say that like 10-9 is it feels like the equity is too high not to put it as a very aggressive bluff, but I don't know why we would do that every single time either. Just like queens.
What are your best bluff candidates on this board?
Overcards.
Overcards with backdoors, right? Which
this is
the nut bluff, right? You really have to have this hand in your calling range. Not really, because you can just have the offsuit version in your calling range, and you can have other suited hands with a flush draw in your calling range, right?
Yeah.
Usually, when you're putting less money in the pot, i.e., by calling, you're going to be doing it with multiple different draws. But with sort of combo draws or combo backdoor draws like this, you want to be putting more money in the pot on an earlier street, because it's more likely to be able to hit one of those back doors, and then river the strongest draw. Right, so very good candidate for making that check raise. So it's not within range. Show you the flop range. So here, like, there's 10-9 raising a lot. 10 offsuit, 10-9 suited, always raising with a backdoor flush draw. So with these just like double overcard hands with sort of these backdoors, suited ones raise at a very high frequency, and the offsuit ones are taking the calling line because you've got plenty of 2-card backdoor flush draws here, right? Which will be able to float and then kind of see the river. A lot of them with gut shots and stuff.
Queens is barely ever calling, to be fair, but
yeah,
still.
It's good to know that these 3 pocket pairs are raising all the time, and then the cutoff is at queens. So that's why I put that in there, right? To know that when you have queens, you can start to just check call, and then the other ones will always raise. Okay, so checks are on the turn. And then we get the river 4s, so there's 2 pair on the board now. How are we playing this?
This is another fantastic run out for us, I would say. Because they'll have a lot more. Yeah, well, than us, just because they bet the flop, and no bluffs, so none of their bluffs improved, while we just have a more condensed range.
We should be polarizing at the river, right? And I think King Deuce is a good hand because it unblocks all the backdoor flush draws that the villain might have bet at the flop. What do you think?
I'm not sure there is.
Okay, so say you got King 2. Why are you betting King 2? Are you betting it? So you say you want to bet a polar range. So are you betting King 2 as a bluff, or are you betting King 2 as a value bet?
As a bluff at the river.
So if you want to bluff the river with King 2. Okay, so if you want to bluff the river with King 2, which hands are you trying to get to fold?
7s, 6s.
Pocket 7s and pocket 6s.
Right.
Okay. I think you'll have difficulty getting either of those 2 hands to fold. Right. Okay. Let's think about the other way. If the opponent's got, you know, Queen high or Jack high or 10 high or 7 high, which they very well could have in this line. Is this hand doing well against them or poorly against them?
It's better, but
yeah, it's better than them, right?
I think but it is very likely that if we check, then the villain will get to bet those 7 high and 10 high kind of hands. So we will have to fold.
Well, I mean, you don't have to fold. You can just call, right? Because you know the opponent's got a lot of those kinds of hands that are bluffing.
So you want to check call King Deuce at the river?
I think it's just a check, actually.
It depends how big your opponent bets, but yeah, why not?
The main point is that because the run out is so bad for them, they have a ton of that, right? So they have to give up a bunch. So you making a ton of EV with King Deuce just by checking and then beating all the give ups. But then, and that means that like they're giving up like some hands with absolutely no showdown value, like, you know, like Jack high or whatever, because they just have to give up a bunch instead of bluffing everything they have. And so if they, just like we saw last time, if you think they're playing like a solver, like perfectly, you would check and you would have a ton of EV because they give up a bunch. And if you think they're bluffing too much because they have a bunch of air and they don't know they're supposed to give up, you check and then they bluff too much and so you call.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll show you the way the solver plays this river in a minute. So this hand is checking. It's got a lot of showdown value. And if the opponent decides to just like bet, a bit small, then you can just check and then call that bet as a bluff catch. So yeah, don't be afraid to bluff catch with certain hands like that. You need to be bluff catching with. Right, you have to think about how your range is going to be constructed, how your river range is going to be constructed here. Which hands are going to make it into the checking line, and what hands you're going to be defending that checking line with, in terms of like check raises, etc. All right, so queens and 10-4.
This is a little confusing, but I think the queens are the 12 big blinds, because I don't see the 10 is I think the best blocker, blocking what's left of any 10-8. So originally I thought the queens bet the twice the pot and we were bluffing with the 10-4, but now after all this conversation, I think that the queens are actually betting pot and the 10-4 is betting twice pot, if I'm right about the card removal that I'm thinking of.
I think those are just clear value bets because they have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here 10-4, you've got a full house. It's bet big when you've got a strong hand, and then bet smaller when you've got a slightly weaker hand there. So
I just thought we were
all of these
too many calls with the fours, so that's what confused me. But yeah, you got a big hand, just bet it big.
I mean, what does the opponent have here? They've got air mostly, right? So we kind of discussed that. So they need to be, when you make a big bet here on the river, that they're going to be calling with ace high sometimes. So here, look at this twice pot bet. We're calling with ace high. Bet 3 times the pot, also calling with ace high. Betting quarter pot, calling all the ace high. Right. So here, like this quarter pot bet, what are kind of you representing? You're representing an ace yourself, blocking. Trying to get called by your opponent's king high, preventing the opponent from doing this to you when you check. Right, so here this is the check line. The opponent is just ripping it in with the top boat, and then betting 3 times a pot with the second boat, and then basically checking back a whole bunch of other stuff. And then this ace 6 kind of stuff is doing this because it gets the chop to fold. That's why it's different between betting and checking there. But as you can see, the opponent is checking back loads of air, right? This no-made hand, right? Basically hands weaker than ace high, representing, almost 75% of their range. If you include the ace high as well, it's close to sort of 95% of their range being ace high or weaker. Okay. So if the range is that weak, we've got king high, right? We want to get the showdown, right? We don't really need to be bluffing that hand in particular. Got too much equity to be bluffing. If the opponent, for example, as in the previous one, want to do something a bit strange, maybe they don't know what to do when they're, dealt this queen high, jack high type stuff in this line. And they just want to like blast off with very weak hands, and then sort of bet a variety of other sizes with these other hands here, right? We can run the river, checking everything, and then against each of those sizes. I mean, that's a bit crazy. Yeah. Right, against each of those sizes, basically always continuing because your opponent doesn't really have any value there. if their range on the river for these kind of smaller sizes is exclusively bluffs, then you're always continuing as a raise, right? Because your opponent just always folds. And you always win the pot just by raising. No real need to actually call anything, because if your opponent just has a hand which is bluffing you, you win the same amount by raising, and then you can also win the pot with hands that are weaker than your opponent's bluffs. Right. So here, you can win the pot with like pocket threes, 6-5 by raising. There's no rate consideration because the opponent's never going to be calling the bet, or almost never going to be calling the bet. Of course, that's just locking the bet when checked line. We can like also consider locking the other lines as well, but the response to a check is going to be the furthest from equilibrium for a lot of weaker players who haven't studied these lines in these runouts. So often you'll be able to exploit people's tendency to overbluff and not give up enough in these lines by checking at a much higher frequency. Okay, great. Next one. Sorry, any questions about this before we move on? Okay, great. Next one, 10-7-2. Now this is pure check down. So it just checks down to the river, checks through on the flop, checks through on the turn, 7 a turn, bring it back to flush draw, and I've got a 5 on the river. How are we looking at our range here? So which one of these do you think is not within range?
I can say for sure it's not King 6 or Ace Jack because, you know, King 6 has isn't something that's going to pure probe the turn or anything like that. Obviously, it's a. And as far as flush draws, like what flush draws to bet in general, blind versus blind, is high showdown value is a very big thing. And you just bet the ace high flush draws less often. You play them more passively for the showdown value more often. So it's definitely between 9-8 and queens that bet the turn.
Okay. So which one do you think it is?
The 9-8.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So this 9-8 probably all basically always bets a flop. And if it doesn't bet the flop, it's definitely betting the turn. So the 9-8 isn't in there for the reason of very high frequency bet on the flop. You don't bet, you're definitely betting the turn. It's not really necessary to have this kind of hand in your checking range, right? Because you can defend your checking range with a variety of draws, and when you've got strong combo draws, open-ended with backdoor flush draws, one of the strongest types of combo draws on these kinds of boards, you don't really need to be checking them because you can defend with other draws, weaker draws. Okay. Now the other three hands. So it's check down.
So I think King 6 would check down, and because King high is actually like good, like it's really good. And we if we check it down, villain can't really go nuts on us, because this time, like I was confused earlier, but in this line we actually do retain a slight polarity advantage, so we can check down. King is actually pretty strong, just king high, and we're not going to face much.
We might cut out that way.
Yeah. Okay. So we're king high. So what does the opponent really have here? Do they have a lot of hands that would have checked back twice?
No one really has anything.
Yeah, not really. None of the two players has much. The fact that the board pairs means that, you know, both players have a pair, right? And it's difficult to make a pair. Difficult to make a pair and check down line. So both players have a pair, so don't underestimate, you know, how this actually changes the distribution of hands in both players' ranges. If the 7 was a 6 or a 4 or something like that, then there'd be much more pairs in the hand rather than on the board. Compared to if the pair's on the board, then there's fewer pairs in the hand, right? Because there's reduces the combinations of 7x pair to 7x trips by that one card which blocks it, and then there's the absence of, you know, an additional rank to make a pair with. So not quite as many pairs because the pairs are already on the board. Now, given that,
King high
in
strong
this
enough.
line, King High is strong enough to show down quite happily, and it's so strong you want to be considering, you know, check calling it as a bluff catcher.
Oh, ace jack is strong enough for 3 big blinds and for value.
Yeah, exactly right. Your opponent's ace high, it's gonna be weaker than this, weaker than ace jack, right? Your opponent with an ace is going to be calling for the 3 big blinds because they block your value range. Right, you bet small here, or half pot here. Hang on, I messed this up. This should be 1.5. Anyway, it doesn't matter. If you make a small bet here on the river, your opponent's going to be calling with plenty of their ace highs and some weak hands as well, as we discussed, king high as well, right? So if they've got king queen, king jack, maybe they'll be block catching those hands. Yes, this should be 1.5. Never mind. All right, so this is the check, and now this leaves the queen. The queen here is essentially the nuts. Blocks, folds. Right, what hands would fold against a very big bet? Queen high is definitely going to fold against a very big bet, and you block all the queen high. You're not really too worried about blocking other kinds of hands like ace queen because your opponent doesn't really have any ace queen from pre-flop. King queen against a very big bet is going to fold, so you block a bunch of folds. All right, so let's have a look at this. So yeah, sorry, ace jack should be 1.5 rather than 3, but the same idea holds. Look at the sort of betting EV is very similar between betting and checking ace jack. Ace king, even ace king goes for the half pot bet sometimes. King 6, see it there. King highs would check and then call a small bet. Not necessarily king 6 because that loses to some of your opponent's potential bluff candidates here, king 6 themselves. But stuff like king queen, king jack will need to be hero calling against a half pot bet. And then your ace highs represent the bulk of your showdown, sort of your checking range, right? Look at the checking range in terms of percentages. It's mostly ace high here. And then it's a bunch of king highs. Right, and then some very weak hands which just give up. So given that your checking range is ace high and king high. King high, you're checking it to try to get to showdown. Right, we'll win at showdown sometimes. Against some of the opponent's weaker checkbacks. We could give up hands and then fold it to a bet. Or if you've got a stronger king high, you're going to be bluff catching. Okay. Was that all the hands? What was going on here on the flop? Yeah, I think we talked about 9, 8. There you go, 9, 8. Just bet 1.5 times a pot on this kind of board. Now, one thing to be a little bit wary of is that this particular sim doesn't have an overbet bigger than this. So I'm going to be running some of these kinds of flops again with a slightly bigger overbet. So that might change some things. You shouldn't really change the check down line too often, too much. It's just mainly going to be changing the betting line. Okay. So yeah, if you're watching the recording later and the sim that you're looking at is a bit different, then that's why. Last one. Actually, does anyone have any questions about this before we move on? All right, last one. 7-3-2, check down. On the 4 of spades, Queen of Hearts. What are we thinking now? So 4 of spades completes the flush, but then it checks through again. And we get to the river with an overcard. So thoughts on the relative strength of hands?
Does the Jack 7 early in the hand like to get a little protection, a little and a little value? Like, I mean, it's not much for any kind of it's got some draw as well. I think it kind of wants just a little bit of protection, seeing as it flopped a pair. So I was tending
top pair is 7, so yeah. Every single hand in the opponent's range can outdraw Jack 7, pretty much.
That's why I was leaning on that one for not being in range, but the 2s pop out too, I guess. Even
2s pop out for value. The 9s pop out for the same reason as Jack 7. But the thing is with the 9s is that they don't mind a full spade coming. And if you bet turn, let's say, and the full spade comes and you have a 9 high flush, it's not like you have a lot of valor anyway, so it's not like you're just very happy to go bet with 9s. So I can see the reasoning for checking 9s, just for 9s being in range. But
what about 2s?
Yeah, 2s I don't know.
It's
between 2s and Jack 7 to me.
Good card on the turn to lead in with 7. Jack 7.
Yeah, like, are you saying we're just going to bet all our top pairs because they're so vulnerable and it's just like a slam dunk bet with Jack 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm just trying to figure out why deuces wouldn't check.
I think so too.
Okay, so check here, going for a check raise, right? Blocking that check back with their 2.
There's no check back 2x, right?
Jack 7's, it's a reasonably strong hand. It's fairly vulnerable. When the 4th, when the 3rd spade comes, right, you're not super scared of a flush because a lot of flush draws would have bet here. But you're more scared of just, offsuit hands with a spade in it, which there are going to be a lot of. It's going to be a lot of flush draws in the opponent's range. So you don't really want to be like, if you think about it, something along the lines of, I'll show you the numbers, something along the lines of a quarter of the opponent's hands will have a single spade in it. So you really want to deny that little bit of equity from your opponents by making a bet here on the turn. I'll show you here. So here, this is the no flush draw. 76.7% no flush draw, and so that means that 24.3% flush draws. And that kind of excludes the stronger hands, but basically 24.3% of hands in the opponent's range has a spade in it. And many of them are weaker than a 7 right now. So betting here on the turn with a lot of your 7x and a lot of the 7x bets, right, almost all of it bets, with the exception of, the hands with a spade in it, because you're not quite as worried about the flush peeling off now. betting small to deny equity from those hands, all those flush draws are still calling. Any hand with a spade is still calling, but you're getting paid for your opponent to draw out to that fourth spade. And then if they've also got overcards and stuff, you're getting paid for those overcards as well. And just double overcards without any kind of flush draw are a bit too weak to continue against the half pot bet. And that also means like if you've got a flush, you can put it in there to get some value as well. All right, and now checks down. Okay. So sort of thinking for similar reasons.
So the 5-3 is plenty strong enough to get a little bit of value with the small size, I would assume. In this line?
So where do you want to put it here?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, if it's just strength, then though I would tempted to bet bigger with the nines, but if it's strength, it's going to be 2s for 12 and 9s for 3.
Yep.
I'm just not quite sure why the 9s don't want to beef it up a bit with the spade blocker.
Well, I mean, you're not super worried. We're not super worried about a flush because a lot of the flushes would bet here, right? The flush draws would bet here and flushes would have bet here. So you're not having the spade blocker doesn't really matter. You're more worried about your opponents having a queen.
Yeah. The river queen, you can't bet any bigger with the 9s.
Okay, so here it is. I mean, 5-3, betting small to get value from ace high, getting value from a 2. Set of 2s, the question is where you put that. I mean, some of the combos will check to go that check raise, but if you check yourself, like a 2 is actually betting for value sometimes into you, right? Because your range is just ace high. So in the check down lines, like you're defending your checking range with ace high. Looking at this, so this is what you're representing when you check. You're representing ace high, and then a bit of king high, and then hands which sort of trap there for the check raise. So the pocket 2s, the set of 2s, doesn't really get anything by checking. Doesn't really get anything by putting into one of the other sizes either. Right? Maybe you can say for the exception of like putting into the same size as king 2. But the trick with pocket 2s is to realize that if you actually bet big enough, you can get your opponents to fold it 2, right? And so with pocket 2s, if you bet big enough, your opponent folds a 2, you end up blocking folds, and so your opponent's more likely to bluff catch you. So that's kind of what's going on here. Or that 2x is folding, right? And so your opponent's going to be sort of bluff catching with other kinds of hands like a queen. Obviously 2 pair. And yeah, like looking at flushes and straights is only represents about 4% of the range, so you're not really too worried about that. Any questions about this one? What was the first one? Not within range. I think we covered that. Like looking at this.
The only question that I had about that last one on the river, like, is like as opposed to the last few that we looked at on the river in terms of like what happens in real life, is this one pretty close as to what happens in real life when we check, or is there a difference here?
I mean, your opponents might not realize that they should be value betting a 2 or a 3 or a 4, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if they just don't bet those hands, we can run the lock, I guess. If they just like don't bet anything weaker than a 7 value, we can run the no lock now. Yeah, I mean, it's still taking the check line a fair amount. And now it's not really protecting the checking range very much because this bet is just always getting snapped off. Right?
Yeah.
So, learning these check down lines is reasonably important because, you know, by the time you get to the river here, it's fairly easy for your opponent to deviate in some way. And usually it's going to be by overbluffing. A lot of people will just stab too much. Especially as you're moving up, players get a little bit too aggressive. So they're just going to stab too much in these check down lines when it's checked to them. And so you can exploit them by taking certain lines and hero calling with king high kind of stuff. And the number of times that I've hero called with king highs and have been right is it's pretty amazing what you can do when you know the opponents just never have it. Okay, so any kind of questions? Let's go over a little bit quiz summary. So when I redo this database with a slightly bigger overbet, maybe some of these overbets will be, you know, sized up a little bit, tweaked a bit. Maybe some hands would move into the bigger overbet size rather than, you know, check raising. But I don't think it's going to be a huge difference for like 4-span. Maybe for some better boards like 6-span and 6-link kind of stuff, then some slightly bigger overbets will be used at much higher frequency by the out of position player. Sort of one of the disadvantages of this particular sim construction is this flop check raise ends up this flop check raise ends up being bigger than the flop overbet, so like you don't really get that balance there. More obvious on like 7-3-2. Yeah. Like these pocket pairs like really want to overbet big, but they don't really have the option to make this big bet on the flop because they just don't have it. So they have to go for the check raise in order to get that that money in. So that's my bad with the sim construction because I don't have enough sizes. Because GTA Plus just is limited to five choices of sizes at the moment. Okay. Any other questions? Any questions about any of this stuff? Any questions? Any of these you're a bit unsure about? Any of these you want me to explain again? Okay, great. So we did looking at check down lines after we sort of check call a bet and then checks down, and if it just checks through the river. Did a little bit of node locking to see, you know, where we're thinking that either we or our opponents would deviate and how to respond to that deviation. And now you know in these check down lines how light you need to get some money in. Often you can be hero calling with king high in lines like this and you'll be right because the opponent is far too weak. They don't have any hands and they just want to bluff to try and get you to fold whatever thing that you have, not really thinking about what hands you have and what hands they have. All right, any questions?
So on those check down lines, right? I guess the thing to keep in mind is that the pre-flop advantage carries through to the river when no action is happening. Is that sort of?
Not really. A lot of the pre-flop advantage would have sort of dissipated by the time it gets to the river because usually if you've got a pre-flop advantage, we're gonna exercise that advantage by betting on the earlier streets. So by the time it gets to check down, by the time it starts to check down here,
I'm thinking the big blind doesn't really get a chance to shed its really bad stuff. So at the beginning, it had more bad combos, and I kind of
at the beginning, earlier on in the tree, it's got a lot of really weak combos, but you construct your checking range to end up being, by the time you get to the river, the same, being roughly the same amount of weakness as the opponent, right? So it's got to do with how you construct your checking range. You end up weakening your checking range sufficiently.
Okay, that makes
So some a little bit different if they decide to bet the flop and then check back the turn, because this is a give up line,
right.
right? Bet flop,
It gives a
all of the bluffs are going to be going to show up here, so it's very easy for them to overbluff the river after they've stabbed the flop, and then check back the turn, right?
Mhm.
Because they don't really want to bet a second time, but then you checked and they're at the river with 10 high and they don't really know what to do, so they just bet.
Right, and if you're disciplined, you know that you have to check down 10 high in the button there. I mean, in the big blind there.
Yeah,
Like if you're
exactly.
disciplined, you know you have to check down that crappy hand because you're over bluffing if you try and bet in this line.
Yeah,
You have
exactly.
to. It's
Because of the
extra.
run out.
Okay, that all
You,
makes
you
sense.
really want to figure out which runouts are good or bad for whoever did what. It changes it changes how much a player gets to bluff drastically is the main thing. And as long as you understand that, you're gonna be able to figure out if they're over bluffing or under bluffing, or they're probably close to GTO. And
Yeah, I mean,
like for example,
here, for example, let's look at this one in terms of bluffing, under bluffing. Betting range, like what's in the betting range? It's looking at this. Okay, just the unmade hands in terms of the kinds of bluffs on the 7-3-2. It's like a lot of overcards, queen high, bit of king high, jack high. So when some of those overcards get there on the turn, sorry, check bet call. Some of those overcards get there on the turn. It's better for the imposition player because all of those bluffs have, turned into a value hand now, right? New top pairs have been made. But the thing to note, and we went through it in sort of this example here, when they check back, their range is still very weak. 7. When they check back, their range is still very weak, right? They still have a lot of just junk that checks back. Right? Yeah, like 9-8 needs to give up, 10-9 needs to give up. So
you sure what happens on a car like a river that improves their air that checks back.
Yeah, if it goes like this. What AA checks back again, actually? Like a queen. Yeah, I mean it's a give up line, so it usually needs to have all these disciplined check give ups, right? Like just for the fact that they get to see the river card for free, it makes sense for them to put a lot of very weak hands in there, which no longer will be able to outdraw the calling range to this turn bet, but can potentially outdraw some hands in the calling range to the flop bet. So it's not like just because the run out got really good for the hands which are in this give up line, they just don't have enough draws that really hit that river. Right, there's no like single river that's usually just going to smash the imposition player. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm looking at it, just like looking if it ups to frequency at all. I imagine it does. I'm looking at the setting, but what I was mostly getting at is, oh yeah, that looks
Close enough.
like for sure in the give up lines it's gonna be less of an effect. But I guess it's off topic. It's just in some other lines, like especially for out of position after they check call bet, stuff like that. Like it would take a very bad run out for out of position to not bluff like all of their bluffs.
Got the highest of 9. River 9. Check here. This is the best river apparently. after the Jack of Hearts. Still got plenty of give ups. So it's very easy for the opponent after they check back the turn to be over bluffing these rivers. So even on some of these best river cards, just because they have so many combos of weak hands now, right? And they need to have so many combos of weak hands here, which check, because otherwise it's impossible to make any hands indifferent on the flop, right? On the flop against his flop bet, you would just fold everything, right? There's not bluffing enough on the flop. And so maybe if your intuition is feeling that your opponent by the time it gets to river is less bluff heavy than you think, then maybe it's just because they're not bluffing the flop as often as you were thinking, right? Or their range is kind of a bit different to this on the flop. Say for example they bet more top pairs and middle pairs, and then their range which checks back ends up being very very merged, right? Very weak, right? We can lock this as well, maybe. Try to reduce the number of combos. Get this to bet. I'm going to bet the top pair, over pair, 2 pair, straight. These pocket pairs. Yeah, sure. 3 as well. Let's bet all the pairs. And then they just have like really weak check back range. On that turn. Run this turn with the different ranges. Anyone want to guess what's going to happen? No guesses.
In the check line?
Yeah, after it goes check if they're betting all of the strong hands on the flop.
I mean, we're just betting everything. Not sure for what size, but
What size do you think?
if they really do bet everything that's a made hand, then it's going to be a smaller size, I'm guessing, or it's going to split with bigger size, and then they have to just call down ace high to prevent us from auto profiting or something like that. Like we bet our top pair like twice the power more, and they have to call down with ace high or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, okay, so it's definitely not going to be a small size. We're going to be a lot of overbetting.
Yeah.
It'll
Would that change if like if you start checking back some weaker pairs, do you think that would change like the overbetting thing?
Yeah,
like
I mean,
you would
the overcard brings a lot of those top pairs there, so it's not quite as bad.
That's fair, yeah.
Different card, maybe like a 5. I complete some straights and stuff. You're betting at a very high frequency. So look at this frequency of sort of betting here about 22% on the 5.
It
See what
seems
happens with
it's
the
waiting
weekend
for the
check back
river.
range. Sorry?
It seems like it's waiting for the river because all the bets are protection bets essentially, like to not get outdrawn by overcards. Just there. And I imagine the crazy stuff might happen on the river. Like once you know the river and you know how to play your hand, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Rather
Probably.
than just trying to fold everything. in turn.
The solver was going to play the rivers in a way to try and make up for any mistakes that there were on the flop. So
Yeah, that's true as well.
there you go, pretty high betting frequency there.
Yeah.
Kind of bet call river card maybe. Block that there. Going for a check raise. And I guess you can say the opposite is true. Say, for example, they've bet all their strong hands and checked all their weak hands. Suddenly, what happens? You just blast it into them. Okay. Any other questions? That's a bit of a tangent. Okay, great. So bit of node locking there. And yeah, when you're studying the sims, you should be doing a bit of node locking yourself to see and test what you think your exploit is going to be compared to how you think your opponent's played. Right. You should think about what the exploit you would make is, and then test whether you're correct or not by running the node lock. That's the best way to do it. Do a bit of thinking before you start locking the nodes, and then keep yourself honest by writing down what you think the result will be. Run the quick node lock, and then see what the result is, and then compare what you thought compared to what the exploit actually is. And then especially for river node locks, because they're so quick, you can do a bunch of different node locks and kind of fiddle with the ranges a bit to see how the solver plays against those different ranges. Okay, so thanks guys. That will be the end of this tutorial. I'll probably do another quiz answer tutorial over the weekend. I've got some time. So hopefully I'll see you guys back there as well. Anyone who's watching this recording, thanks. Got one question from Filthy in the YouTube chat. What kinds of boards are we betting out of position? I mean, today we looked at the low rag boards, and like when you're in the small blind here in these kinds of lines here, like you're going to be doing a lot of checking. Out of position generally in GTO land needs to do a lot of checking and a lot of betting small, protection betting kind of stuff. And when they've got a really strong hand, they're using that to defend the checking range. So thanks for that question. Everyone else, I'll see you on the next one. We will do one of these tutorials again very soon. Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. See you guys.